What happens when the creators of Persona try desperately not to make another Persona game only to accidentally make exactly that? Well, you get Metaphor ReFantazio, Atlus's ambitious new IP that's simultaneously their most polished work and quite possibly their most creatively bankrupt. And after spending far too many hours in this fantasy kingdom, I can tell you exactly why this game left me wanting to play a Persona game instead, and why I regret taking a mid-game break to complete Expedition 33. Right, let me set the stage properly. In December 2016, fresh off the Japanese release of Persona 5, Atlus announced Zero Studio, a new development team comprised of the holy trinity behind modern Persona games: director Katsura Hashino, character artist Shigenori Soejima, and composer Shoji Meguro. Their mission? Create something entirely new, something that wasn't just another Persona or Shin Megami Tensei, and according to Hashino himself, the fantasy theme wasn't even immediately decided on. It only emerged after countless staff discussions where the word fantasy kept appearing. They wanted to unravel the fantasy genre in their own way, creating a world that serves as a mirror to our reality whilst being completely separate. The core theme would be utopia, exploring ideals that can never come true in reality. 7 years and one pandemic later, we have Metaphor ReFantazio, released on October 11, 2024 for PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation 4 and 5. This is a game that very clearly demonstrates decades of Atlus's JRPG refinement, while simultaneously feeling like it's having an identity crisis. It's trying so hard to be different that it loops back around to being exactly what it's trying not to be. The game is mechanically sound, visually competent, and utterly, absolutely forgettable. And that teal and pink GUI, all things holy and unholy, whoever signed off on that color palette needs their eyes checked. But we'll get to that disaster later. Metaphor ReFantazio takes place in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, a medieval fantasy world that's explicitly designed as a mirror to our own contemporary reality. And when I say explicitly, I mean the game literally tells you this within the first few seconds of the opening cutscene, and the big twist about the world's origins are blindingly obvious from those first few seconds. From the start, you're introduced to this scheming Machiavellian man, immediately told that whilst you're being introduced to a fantasy, it's not really that far off from reality. Subtlety is not this game's strong suit, and you'll notice that particular pattern everywhere, from its visual and audio design to its narrative and world building. The world itself consists of 9 different tribes, or races as they're sometimes called. You've got the Elder, our protagonist's race, the Clamar, the Roag, the Rosante, the Yugif, the Nidia, the Mustari, the Paripus, and the Ishkia. Each race faces different forms of discrimination based on their appearance and perceived ability. The Elder, for instance, are branded as tainted by the state religion, believed to have inherited dangerous and heretical magic. The story kicks off with Louis Guillaburn assassinating King Hythlodius V during a cutscene shown every single time you launch the game. After a very long and frankly boring tutorial and intro section of the game, the narrative opens with what I would describe as not only an election, but also Cannonball Run, immediately establishing its very confused tone. With the king dead and the prince cursed, the kingdom needs a new ruler. The dead king's spirit appears and reveals he's used the royal magic to create a magical democracy. Anyone can become king if they win the people's support through a royal tournament. The people's feelings are literally manifested in a giant statue of heads and faces. The larger your head grows in the statue, the more citizens want you as their leader. It's about as subtle as using Twitter follow accounts to determine governmental positions, and probably just as useful for creating a working political system. The game makes it clear early on that you'll eventually throw your hat in the ring, because of course you will, but for the vast majority of the time it pretends like all the efforts you're going through are actually on behalf of the previously mentioned cursed prince, who's the best person for the position because he's the prince, and reasons. The entire game, its narrative and its world building, is clear metaphor with obvious parallels to current day issues, but it's the kind of metaphor a first-year philosophy student might write. Obvious, heavy-handed, and often contradictory. And while said socio-political metaphors are everywhere, they're often very shallow, and they're handled with the delicacy of a drunken hippo-shaped woman trying to take advantage of 3 a.m. vodka goggles in a poorly lit nightclub. Race and religion is one of the areas where the world building begins to completely fall apart, and while it's not a unique example within the game's narrative and lore, it is a glaring logical hole. To start with, all but one of these races follow the same sanctus religion that actively oppresses most of them. The game never adequately explains why some of them, like the Yugif, who are treated like vermin and discriminated against for their appearance, would worship a god that explicitly says they're inferior. Why would anyone propagate a faith that marks them as lesser beings? What is the positive incentive for any of these supposedly inferior species to follow a faith that not only oppresses them, but doesn't provide them with any sort of benefit, spiritual spiritual or otherwise. Now, this is a tad more serious a topic than I would normally touch on in one of my reviews, but bear with me, Hinduism and the caste system. But lower castes, like all others, are believed to have equal access to spiritual liberation through devotion, righteous living, and fulfilling their caste-specific duties. By performing their prescribed duties, lower castes were traditionally taught that they could accumulate positive karma, improving their prospects in future lives or attaining moksha. Devotional traditions, such as those in the Bhakti movement, emphasize that anyone, regardless of caste, could connect directly with the divine through love and surrender, bypassing those hierarchical restrictions. So even in our real world, a system of faith that actively and objectively oppresses some groups of people while pedestalizing others still has benefits, incentives, and routes for spiritual success and equality to those it deems lower and less valuable than others. But I found nothing like that about sanctism in the game, and while it may be squirreled away deep in lore notes the player can access, it's not something I found referenced through dialogue, background chatter, or any of the more easily available lore information, which tells me that the writers didn't really think this through. And again, this isn't a unique example of narrative or world building holes left by the writers. It's one of the many that make me question both the skill of those writers and the amount of life experience any of them actually have. The game's big twist, and I use the term very loosely because it's telegraphed from the start, is that the enemies you fight called humans are actually mutated beings. Every single one of the fantasy races are revealed to be genetic offshoots of ancient humans who evolved after the world before was destroyed by magical warfare. So humans are simultaneously the ancient progenitors of all the races and the corrupted monsters you fight, and the game is very obviously trying to say something profound about human nature and its biological and cultural evolution over time. But it's like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with 2 mallets and no thumbs. Bits of meat get splattered everywhere and very occasionally group up into the semblance of a useful organ. And unlike my recently used metaphor, Atlus's fails to work not only because it's trying to be too many things at once, but because, like every other mature theme and topic in this game, it's looked at through a very adolescent and ignorant lens. It really does feel as if it was written by people who have very little real-world experience of these topics and who are very spoiled by the relatively peaceful and low-conflict society they live in, which just dilutes any impact or authenticity they were trying to achieve with what they put together. So this is where I'm going to have to get into actual spoiler territory. So if you haven't played the game yet or just want to avoid as many spoilers as possible, then skip ahead to the next section. I put timestamps for them all in the description below, so feel free to use them to find whatever section is most useful to you. Getting back to the analysis, the story's pacing is fundamentally broken. You're thrust into this grand adventure with companions you barely know, and you're expected to care about their struggles and relationships without any foundation being laid. Take Grius, for example. He's your early mentor figure, a grizzled old soldier, a single father, an honorable warrior. The game desperately wants his death to be this emotional gut punch. They pile on the sympathy. He's raising a child alone. He's a loyal soldier. He believes in justice. But you spend very little real time with him before he's killed off in the most predictable way possible. And when the necromancer, who literally arrived with an army of undead, turns your dead friend into an undead, the game acts like this is shocking and somehow surprising. I mean, who could have possibly seen that coming? Everyone saw it coming because it was painfully and insultingly obvious. The emotional impact is non-existent because there's been no time to build a genuine connection. You don't care about Grius. He's just a plot device wearing the mask of a character. Your protagonist starts as a seemingly blank slate member of the oppressed Elder tribe, traveling to lift a curse on the prince. You know, standard JRPG fare. But then comes the reveal. You're not actually a person at all. You're the prince's archetype, a magical construct housing his soul, born from his hopes and dreams to change the world. This should be a massive character moment. Everything you thought you knew about yourself is false. You're not even human, or elder, or whatever. You're essentially a magical hologram with delusions of personhood. The game presents this as a choice. Merge with the prince's body, or reject your destiny. Choose wrong and Louis takes the throne unopposed, destroying Uchronia and erasing it from history. But the choice feels arbitrary, because the game hasn't earned this moment. There's no genuine character development leading to this decision, and it was always going to play out with the player character taking that central role, because that's how it was written. It doesn't feel natural, and it doesn't feel very good. The twist itself is also fairly obvious from the start, but like many aspects of the game's narrative, it tries to present itself as a well thought out and properly foreshadowed mystery, but upon its revelation just makes you ask the game to tell you something you don't already know and didn't figure out within seconds of being introduced to said character. Louis Guillaumin is your standard sympathetic villain with extreme methods. He's an elder who understands the true history of the world, and he wants to use the royal scepter to transform everyone into human, ending discrimination by making everyone equally monstrous. Yes, that idea really is as stupid and mustache twirly as you think it is, and no, it's not some sort of subversion or deconstruction of the true equality is everyone being weak and dead beneath me trope. Now, if you're an inexperienced adolescent or a short-sighted adult, his motivation makes sense, at least on paper, because if everyone's the same, there's no basis for discrimination. But the execution is pure Saturday morning cartoon. He discards fake Clemar horns to reveal his true identity. He gives grandiose speeches about the world being flawed and needing destruction, and he even offers the protagonist a chance to join him and rule together because he just didn't have enough predictable tropey dialogue, so they decided to give him more. The final battle has him transform into an angelic human with an outer mask resembling Lucifer. Subtle this is not. The game wants to have complex themes about power, discrimination, and the price of equality, but it delivers them all with the nuance of a PowerPoint presentation delivered by a blue-haired Redditor with delusions of grandeur. Each story arc has strict time limits with genuine consequences. Fail to stop Zorba's day of calamity in 10 days, half of Grand Trad's population dies. Miss the deadline to expose the kidnapping culprit in 12 days, the prince dies from his curse. Take too long to retrieve Dracodios, Louis declares you traitors and hunts you down one by one, with Will and Gallica being assassinated by Zorba disguised as a Sanctus. These deadline endings are genuinely dark, but they feel disconnected from the main narrative. They're failure states rather than alternate paths, punishment for poor time management rather than meaningful story branches. Overall, the game's approach to its central metaphors is problematic from the start. The title of the game is obvious and on the nose. In fact, immediately in the first few seconds after seeing the first cutscene when you're introduced to Louis' scheming and betrayal, you're told that while you're being introduced to a fantasy, it's not really that far off from reality. Some might consider this to be foreshadowing, but that would require more subtlety than being hit in the face with a glowing neon brick. The political and social commentary lacks subtlety in translation. The entire game is clear metaphor, but this clarity becomes heavy-handedness, with the game explicitly stating its themes, rather than allowing them to emerge naturally through storytelling and character interaction. The Japanese voice acting is reasonably good, as you would expect, and the characterizations and performances are also similarly good, despite the dialogue, characters, and scenarios all being quite trite and banal. This quality extends throughout the game, with emotional weight and proper delivery in every scene, but again, all of those scenes are very predictable, and it's nothing we haven't seen before, and nothing that hasn't been done better countless times before. The English voice acting is of decidedly poorer quality, and characters just sound cartoony, which is a very common pattern I've noticed with English-speaking voice actors in a wide variety of media. The characterization through dialogue is mixed. Gallica, for example, is described as outspoken but reassuring, suggesting the localization at least attempts to maintain character personality, but instead she comes across as angry and insufferable. Characters lack distinct voices, and the game struggles to make characters feel unique through their dialogue, and to be quite blunt about it, both the overall writing and the localization does very little to elevate them beyond their basic roles and archetypes. Pun absolutely intended. To put it simply, the localization is bad, inaccurate, and not very entertaining, but it is far less egregious than what we usually see from Japanese titles coming to the West. But that doesn't mean that games and gamers don't deserve better from these performances. Disappointing storytelling aside, let's dig into what Metaphor does well, because credit where it's due. The combat system is mechanically excellent, and I had quite a bit of fun with it, even when deep in the grind. It's essentially the press turn system from Shin Megami Tensei, with elements from Persona's combat using archetypes instead, but it's been refined and polished to near perfection for Atlus RPGs. Each party member provides one turn icon at the top of the screen. These icons are your action economy, and you'll need to use them wisely or watch your carefully planned strategies crumble. But these action icons aren't simple one and dones. Hit an enemy's weakness, you'll only consume half an icon, effectively doubling your actions. Hit a resistance, you'll lose 2 icons instead of 1. Get your attack absorbed or reflected, you'll lose all remaining icons and your turn ends immediately. This system is brutally punishing but scrupulously fair. Every enemy has clear weaknesses and resistances that you can discover through experimentation or the game's analysis system. The game expects you to learn these patterns and exploit them ruthlessly. Button mashing through menus and not taking advantage of first strike attacks in the overworld will get you killed faster than you can say teal and pink GUI, and I fucking hate that set of colors. But as always, I'm getting ahead of myself. The formation system adds another strategic layer that many players might initially overlook. Characters in the front row deal and receive full physical damage. Back row characters deal reduced physical damage but take less damage in return. Magic damage, crucially, remains unaffected by row position. This creates meaningful tactical decisions. Your knight wants to be in front, absorbing hits and dealing full damage with their sword. Your mage belongs in the back, slinging spells without worrying about physical attacks. The commander archetype, for example, specializes in formation manipulation, with abilities that can shift your entire party's positioning mid-battle. Some enemy attacks target specific rows, forcing quick adjustments. It's quite a simple system that adds surprising depth to encounter design. Where Metaphor attempts innovation is its hybrid combat system, and it's not too bad at all for something that's actually quite simple in its experience. In the overworld, you can attack enemies in real time before transitioning to turn-based combat. This isn't just a gimmick, it fundamentally changes how you approach encounters, but it is very basic hack and slash combat and not actually that fun. Every enemy has a break gauge that depletes as you strike them. Fully deplete it before entering combat and they lose their first turn, which is a massive advantage. But timing and positioning matter. Whiff your attack or let them strike first and you'll enter battle with your entire party afflicted with anxiety, reducing their hit rates. The phase sight system, activated by Gallica, color codes enemies by relative difficulty. Red enemies are significantly higher level and you should avoid them unless you're feeling suicidal. Yellow enemies are on par. Blue enemies are beneath your level and you can always defeat them entirely in real-time combat. White enemies are unknown. You've never encountered this type before, and until you have a fight with them, you won't know what level they actually are. Once you're sufficiently over-leveled, blue enemies can be destroyed in the overworld without entering turn-based combat at all. It's actually an elegant solution to the age-old JRPG problem of tedious random encounters against a weak enemy. But now here's where things get properly interesting, especially for fans of Atlus RPGs. Unlike Persona, where you summon mythological beings, or SMT, where you command demons, Metaphor has you physically transform into archetypes. Your character's bodies engulfed in magical energy as they embody the spirits of ancient heroes and kings. The system starts with 14 origin archetypes: Seeker, Warrior, Mage, Healer, Knight, Brawler, Merchant, Gunner, Faker, Thief, Commander, Masked Dancer, Summoner, and Berserker. Each of them are gained through either being default, through character interactions, or through leveling up previous archetypes. Each origin archetype has 2 to 3 evolution tiers. The Seeker becomes Magic Seeker, then Soul Hacker. The Warrior evolves to Sword Master, then branches to either Samurai or Royal Warrior. These aren't just stat upgrades. Each tier fundamentally changes your available skills and your combat role. Evolution requires significant mag investment and meeting specific requirements. The Magic Knight, for example, needs Knight rank 20 and Mage rank 10, plus 8,100 mag as a cost. Royal archetypes, the ultimate forms exclusive to each party member, demand even more. Rank 20 in multiple advanced classes plus 30,000 mag. The skill inheritance system is where Metaphor's character building truly shines. Visit more in Academia after June 11th and you'll unlock the ability to share skills between unrelated archetypes. This really provides a great deal of combinations available to the player for character building, and this system enables genuinely creative builds. For example, a paladin with Faker illusion magic for emergency escapes, or a summoner who inherited healing spells for self-sufficiency, a berserker with commander buffs for solo powerhouse potential, or a knight with cleric heals and gunnery debuffs for a back row heal tank. The real limitation here is mag cost. Inheriting skills isn't cheap and you're always balancing whether to unlock new archetypes or optimize existing ones. Mag itself isn't even that difficult to obtain, but just like getting character levels, archetype levels, gold, or other resources, it requires a whole bunch of grind. Synthesis skills unlock during your first Mausoleum battle on June 11th. These require specific archetype combinations between party members, not just classes from the same tree, but specific pairings the developers predetermined. Examples of this are the Knight and Healer having Magic Guard, which is a party-wide elemental barrier, or 2 warriors having access to Blazing Blade, which is a multi-hit fire slash, or the Commander and Mage having access to Strategic Bombardment, which is a devastating magical assault. These skills consume multiple turn icons and MP from all participants. They're powerful but costly, requiring careful timing to maximize their impact. Here's the critical failure though. For all their mechanical importance, synthesis skills look absolutely dreadful. The animations are stiff, the effects are generic, and they lack any sense of impact or spectacle. Compared to Persona's all-out attacks or even basic spell animations from other JRPGs, they are embarrassingly poor. And frankly, I found them to be quite shit and boring, and that's stating it mildly. Where Metaphor excels is combat flow. There's a brilliant animation system where actions can overlap. You'll begin your next character's attack while enemies are still recovering from the previous hit. An enemy gets knocked down, starts standing up, and your next attack connects while they're still mid-animation, triggering contextual visual reactions. This creates incredible visual fluidity. Combat feels fast and dynamic despite being turn-based. The camera dynamically positions itself behind active characters. Menus appear and disappear with snappy transitions. It almost doesn't feel like turn-based combat until you stop pressing buttons. The battle retry system really deserves praise too, and it's very clearly there to be a major tool for the player to use during combat. Mess up your strategy, waste crucial MP on the wrong spell, just retry from the beginning with all resources restored. It's a simple quality of life feature that removes frustration without reducing difficulty. And it also gives the player a way to face down boss encounters with the specific intent of learning their patterns and weaknesses without hitting a game over screen and losing out on all those hard-earned resources. Now, the real challenge in combat isn't HP management, it's MP. Healing items and skills are more readily available at shops, however MP recovery is usually found only in dungeons themselves in limited quantities. Running out of MP in a dungeon is essentially a death sentence. Your healers can't heal, your mages can't exploit weaknesses, you're reduced to basic physical attacks against enemies designed to punish exactly that approach. This forces genuine resource management. Do you use MP to quickly defeat regular enemies or save it for the boss you know that's coming? This level of resource tension only lasts until you find one of the many grind spots the devs put in some of the dungeons where the enemies specifically drop MP recovery items or other similar hard to find resources. And this isn't even too far into the game world. And it's not the only kind. There are plenty of spots to grind for various limited buy resources which you can stock up on with ease as long as you have the levels and patience. Metaphor's approach to grinding and level progression embodies the same conservative design philosophy that plagues the rest of the game. Experience gains follow predictable JRPG mathematics. You fight enemies at your level for moderate gains, below your level for a pittance, and above your level for substantial rewards. It's functional but entirely unremarkable. The stat allocation system offers an illusion of customization that ultimately feels meaningless. Each level grants one free point to distribute amongst strength, magic, endurance, agility, or luck. For example, if you want your mage archetype to deal more damage, then it's best to invest in magic. Revolutionary game design, this is not, and really, that's a theme I've noticed across all this game's mechanics throughout my entire playthrough. What's particularly frustrating with this is the hidden fixed stat increases. On top of your single allocated point, characters receive predetermined stat boosts that you can't influence. The game wants to ensure your protagonist remains somewhat balanced, regardless of player choice, undermining the entire point of manual stat allocation. To its credit though, Metaphor implements several systems to reduce the grinding tedium. The Unscathed Triumph system rewards perfect play with bonus experience and mag. If you win battles without taking damage, you'll level faster. It incentivizes skillful play over mindless grinding, though the bonus isn't substantial enough to eliminate grinding entirely. The Faceit system partially alleviates grinding tedium once you've overleveled. Blue enemies can be destroyed instantly in the overworld without entering combat, providing small experience gains without time invested. It's an elegant solution borrowed from Persona, because why waste time in combat against difficult enemies just for XP when you can just equip the merchant archetype for an AoE basic attack and repeatedly run through those blue mobs while you watch your numbers go up. The recruitment center in the royal capital offers a one-time stat boost based on your responses. It's a minor but permanent increase that reduces the need for some early grinding, and these are small mercies in a game that otherwise demands significant time investment. The Gauntlet Runner activities provide alternate progression paths. Cleaning grants HP increases, bathing with specific salts boosts various stats, reading raises royal virtues while traveling. These activities let you progress during mandatory travel time, transforming dead time into character development. Cooking with party members creates consumables that can substitute for levels in difficult fights. A well-timed attack boost or defense meal can bridge the gap when you're under-leveled. It doesn't eliminate grinding, but it does provide options for players to forward. Difficulty spikes appear at predictable intervals, typically before major boss fights or when entering new regions with new large dungeons. The game expects you to grind when you hit these walls, but the aforementioned systems provide alternatives, and there are several really efficient grinding spots that will net you resources and XP galore with minimum effort. You can also try to perfect your strategy for Unscathed Triumphs, craft beneficial meals that will give you out-of-combat boosts or pre-combat buffs to gain a greater advantage when facing those challenges. Weather affects grinding efficiency in frustrating ways. Bad weather strengthens enemies and increases experience points, but removes your ability to exploit weaknesses for extra turn. And while they do give you higher XP points, in return you will not receive the extra. This transforms efficient grinding into a slog, though it's optional because you can simply wait for better weather, or better yet, use one of those more efficient grind spots and essentially disregard the weather system entirely. Late game level requirements become astronomical. Going from level 60 to level 70 requires exponentially more experience than early game progression. The game expects you to engage with optional content and side quests. The lack of respec options turns every level up into permanent decisions because stat choices are permanent. However, the game does allow you to bank stat points by opting to skip assigning those points when leveling up. This lets cautious players wait until they understand the system better, but for those of you who have a firm idea of what stat spread and character build you want, the game allows you to assign them once you have the levels and archetypes needed directly from your character stat page. Archetype levels progress separately from character levels, requiring additional grinding. Each archetype must be leveled individually, and switching to a new one means starting from scratch for each character, equipping an archetype or vice time. The archetype experience gains are separate from regular experience, effectively doubling your grinding requirements, and while there are items that can speed this up, specifically items like hero fruits, which provide a set amount of archetype XP for each one consumed, it doesn't do enough to reduce the level of grind so it's not an insulting mess. One positive mercy here that devs implemented is that archetypes leveled by one character become cheaper for others to unlock. For example, if Stroll masters the warrior tree, other party members can access those archetypes at a reduced mag cost. It doesn't eliminate the grinding whatsoever, but it does prevent complete redundancy. And going back to difficulty modes, Regicide difficulty exposes the grinding system's fundamental flaws. Enemies gaining extra turn icons means you can't rely on level advantages. You need optimal builds and maxed archetypes. This transforms the game into a grinding marathon, where progress is measured in small statistical increments rather than player skill improvement. But the most efficient players are still just going to use the most efficient grind spots to get around this. That doesn't mean the grind will lessen, just that experienced players will use the path of least resistance to get those levels, instead of taking on the most difficult challenges just for the sake of leveling up. Overall though, combat really isn't that difficult. Yes, some of the bosses and enemies are absolute level check, but really, as long as you take advantage of first strikes, exploit elemental or damage weaknesses, and make sure your level is always slightly ahead of the curve by abusing the action combat system in easily accessible dungeon grind spots with weaker mobs, you'll always have the advantage in combat. I'm going to address this part first because it was one of the things that annoyed me most about the game's visuals. The teal and pink GUI color palette in a medieval fantasy setting with mostly muted earth tones. To put it bluntly, it's fucking ugly, and whoever put that together has no understanding of color theory. These are not pleasing colors when used together, and they clash with literally everything else on screen. Everywhere these colors are used are a constant reminder that someone somewhere thought this looked good and no one decided to counter their stupidity. This is particularly irritating because Atlus are generally better at this when it comes to use of color and style. Just look at Persona 5's UI, bold red and black, that complements the game's rebellious aesthetics. Persona 4's yellow perfectly matches its more upbeat slice of life tone, while using those brighter colors as a way to express the dichotomy between the peaceful lives of the townsfolk and the dreadful murders that are central to the game's plot. Persona 3's blue reinforces its melancholic themes of depression and inner psychological conflict. Now look at Metaphors. It's like someone spilled highlighter ink on a perfectly decent interface for no reason other than to have ugly splash colors for some sort of visual distinction. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of style to the menu. It's very colorful, it's very signature, right? And the problem is that everything about it is very overdone and a little anachronistic for the setting. This isn't just about colors, it's about fundamental design philosophy. The UI wants to have Persona stylistic flair, but completely misunderstands what made Persona's UI work and how those elements fit with the game's themes, settings, and characters. It uses so many unnecessary moving animations that every single menu, dialogue box, or visual interaction comes across as if the artist had just found animated geometry for the first time and decided to vomit it all over the interface. The anachronistic nature is particularly jarring because the game uses a medieval fantasy setting with castles, swords, and magic, and yet overlaid with a UI that looks like it was designed by someone wanting cyberpunk aesthetics, but with no idea how to make them look good and not like cheap cookie cutter effects. The excessive style over substance approach permeates every menu, and the problem compounds over different environments. The same teal and pink that's merely ugly in towns becomes actively detrimental in dark dungeons where contrast is crucial. In bright outdoor areas, it washes out. In combat, it distracts from enemy telegraphs and important visual information. Even functional menus suffer. The archetype selection screen, one of the game's core systems and menus, is rendered in these same colors and with the same garish and unnecessary animated visual flares. What should be an epic moment of choosing your transformation is undermined by a UI that looks like a neon sign malfunction. This isn't nitpicking, it's a fundamental failure that affects every moment of gameplay and immersion. When players spend dozens of hours looking at menus, battle screens, and dialogue boxes, the UI needs to enhance rather than detract from the experience. Metaphor's UI doesn't just fail to enhance, it actively damages the game's visual presentation and player enjoyment, and that's not acceptable in any game in today's market. The character designs embody everything wrong with Metaphor's creative direction. The protagonist is designed to be far too androgynous in almost every way, and yes, I am aware that androgynous character designs are an anime trope regularly used by Atlus, but it's overdone and makes no sense for this character. But the problems run deeper than just a bit of androgyny. The character designs aren't terrible, but they aren't great either, and they come across as oddly bland. And again, that's not to say they're not drawn well. The art is of a consistently good quality, but it's almost like they've intentionally made them to be as vanilla and unmemorable as possible. This intentionally vanilla approach extends throughout the cast, which is incredibly disappointing because Atlus are very good at creating memorable and unique character designs that pop off the screen and embed themselves in your mind. The technical quality is there, but technical competence without creative vision results in forgettable designs that fail to leave any lasting impression. The archetype system represents the game's biggest visual opportunity and its most disappointing execution. The archetype transformations look quite cool, but ever so generic, and this undermines them entirely because there's, again, nothing memorable about. The transformation aspect should be the game's visual signature and should make players want to see those designs as much as possible, but they simply don't. The archetypes lack the iconic visual language that make Persona's mythological figures or SMT's demons instantly recognizable. They're competent fantasy designs, very generic JRPG, and aren't up to the high standards that should be met by experienced developers. The game world and overall visual experience suffers from a very muted presentation. For the most part, I think the rest of the color palette, other than the teal and pink, is mostly okay, but really it needed to pop a bit more because as it is, it's a bit flat and a bit boring and overall lacking in that sense of style, sexiness, and memorability that is a signature of Atlus RPGs. And this flatness extends to beyond just color choices. Areas you run around in, especially areas where you're going to encounter enemies and get into combat, make you feel like you're in a video game dungeon, even if you're in the outdoors, because everything feels like differently textured corridors with regularly placed open space for encountering multiple enemies. Technical effects actively worsen the presentation. For example, the motion blur, speed lines when you run through dungeons are excessive and honestly make the visuals ugly and detract from their general appeal, and it's a baffling artistic choice. The animation quality also varies quite wildly. The majority of combat animations are really good and are nice and fluid. They're fast paced and keeps you visually engaged, but then other attack or spell animations can be stiff, and out of combat animations are all stiff and almost doll-like. And while they're not the worst thing in the world, they certainly could have been better. One of the game's strangest visual decisions involves character expressions during dialogue. The 2D artwork for the facial expressions that are used in dialogue are well made and expressive, and it's something that's been used for years in similar JRPGs, but here's the problem. The vast majority of the facial animations on the actual character models are not very good, and rather than improve 3D facial animations to be at least mediocre in presentation, they slap the 2D portraits over them instead. To me, it came across like a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. The enemy design philosophy is simultaneously ambitious and confused. Some of the monster designs are incredibly unique, but not very visually appealing or memorable. The human enemies present particular problems, since these particular enemies are meant to be metaphorical representations of corrupted humanity, but they just look like generic JRPG monsters put together by someone who thought they'd be as shocking as possible, but with no sense of visual aesthetic. And while it was clear that the devs really do want as much metaphor and ridiculousness as possible, these didn't gel together into good visual presentation. Now, I have to stress this one thing about the visuals. Despite the negative aspects I've highlighted and critiqued, this is a reasonably good looking game. The art and visual style is of a good technical quality, but the competence without artistic vision creates a hollow experience. I think that Atlus really dropped the ball here because every element is competent but forgettable, polished but generic. It's the visual equivalent of elevator music professionally conducted and produced, but utterly unmemorable and not entertaining or pleasing. I've touched on this before, but Metaphor's level design philosophy can be summed up in one word: corridors. Areas you run around in, especially areas where you're going to encounter enemies and get into combat, all feel like corridors. This isn't just about the dungeon design either. Outdoor areas, towns, even supposedly open fields are designed as elaborate hallways. There's always a relatively clear path forward with minimal deviation. Exploration isn't rewarded very well because there's nowhere to really explore beyond more corridors and hidden or disguised corridors. Most modern JRPGs have moved past this design philosophy. Even linear games create the illusion of openness, but Metaphor doesn't even try. The actual dungeon mechanics and design are competent but uninspired. You have save points at regular intervals, treasure chests with predictable loot, simple puzzles that barely qualify as obstacles, and mini-bosses guarding progression, or hidden loot that's slightly better than what you would get elsewhere. The main challenge comes from resource attrition. MP recovery items are scarce in dungeons, forcing careful management, but this is artificial difficulty. You're not solving clever puzzles or navigating complex layouts, just rationing your resources through linear corridors, and the grind spots that regularly drop these resources completely infantilize and remove even this semblance of challenge. Towns follow the same restrictive philosophy. Grand Trad, the capital, should feel massive and lived in, but instead it's a series of connected corridors with shops and NPCs placed at convenient intervals. The fast travel system partially compensates for this. You can warp directly to any previously visited shop, but it's another bandage on another underlying problem. Towns just aren't interesting to navigate because they're not designed as real spaces. The blade riding mechanic lets you move move faster through these corridors, but that doesn't make them more interesting. You're just traversing the same linear paths at higher speed through highly uninteresting locales. If you played Persona, the calendar system will feel immediately familiar because it's literally the same system. Days pass, you have morning, afternoon, and evening time slots, and major story events have deadline dates. The game's upfront about deadlines. Giant red text warns you when time is running short by it, and if you miss a deadline, you get a unique game over scene showing the consequences of your failure. It's punishing but fair, and the game gives you every opportunity to manage your time properly. Time management itself involves balancing several competing priorities, exploring dungeons which are only available in afternoons and consume the entire day, raising royal virtues through shorter activities, progressing follower bonds, and completing side quests before they expire. The royal virtue system replaces Persona's social stats with the equivalents that are meant to be core virtues of any ruler: courage, wisdom, tolerance, eloquence, and imagination. These stats gate significant content. For example, you can't progress Maria's bond without tolerance rank 2, and you need wisdom rank 2 to unlock the merchant archetype. Brigitte requires courage rank 3 and 4 for her later bonds. The follower system is Persona's social links but without the romance, and 8 ranks per character, each unlocking new passive abilities, archetypes, or opportunities for extra resources. Unlike Persona, your dialogue choices don't affect bond progression. They only determine how much mag you receive. This removes the sort of tension from conversations you can find in Persona games, where picking wrong could waste your limited time. Here, you'll rank up regardless. The only question is whether you get 500 or 1000 mag as bonus. It's more forgiving, but less engaging. Party member bonds feel a bit more developed, but not by much. They all have proper story arcs and character growth, even if predictable and rather boring. NPC bonds, however, often feel perfunctory. You check in, have a brief conversation, collect your rewards. There's less emotional investment when you know the outcome is predetermined. Magla, also known as mag, serves as the secondary currency. You earn it from battle victories, correct dialogue choices and bond events, daily collection from the Coronation Rock, and quest completion rewards. The mag exchange system adds a risk-reward element. Bad weather increases exchange rates, but also makes dungeon exploration more dangerous. So, do you cash out during a storm for better rates, or save mag for archetype unlocks? Late game mag costs are astronomical. Royal archetypes require 30,000 mag just to unlock, and that's not counting inheritance costs. This creates a genuine resource management challenge, with every mag spent on convenience being one not saved for power. The popularity system ties directly into the story's election theme. Your giant stone head grows as the citizens support you. Higher popularity means more daily mag and occasional bonuses. Popularity increases through main story progression, completing citizen requests, making public-friendly choices in events, and general heroic behavior. It's a clever narrative mechanical integration undermined by predictable implementation. Of course you'll win the election because that's how the story has to go, and where it was pointing from the very first seconds of the game's intro. The game never seriously entertains other possibilities, and this absolute predictability takes away the desire to invest yourself into the story or gameplay. Equipment is archetype dependent. Equip the warrior and you use a sword. Equip the gunner and use a firearm. There are still pieces of gear to find or purchase, but there's not much variety in customization. You can't really be a sword-wielding mage or a staff-using warrior unless you equip an archetype and then add a couple of skills from a different one. Item design is mostly conservative, but it's just a resource that can be mined by grinding in areas for a considerable amount of time. Saying that, when you first start the game, those resources are far more limited in availability. The game has 5 difficulty options which provide reasonable accessibility for players of all kinds, though most of them don't differ too drastically other than regicide difficulty. Storyteller provides auto-revival on defeat, double damage dealt and half damage received. Easy provides a moderate boost to player power. Normal is the standard experience. Hard has enemies hitting slightly harder and the player dealing slightly less damage, and Regicide has enemies getting extra turn icons and provides maximum challenge. Regicide is genuinely brutal. Every enemy getting an extra turn icon fundamentally changes combat dynamics. You can't rely on overwhelming offense when enemies get more actions. It's locked after selection and unavailable until completing the true ending. The Gauntlet Runner serves as your mobile base between locations. It's functional but uninspired, a vehicle that exists purely to justify loading screens and provide a menu for travel activity. Traveling on the Gauntlet Runner operates on preset routes between locations. You can't freely explore, you select a destination and watch your vehicle icon move along predetermined paths. It's the illusion of a large explorable world without any actual exploration. During travel, you can do different things, like read, which raises your royal virtues. You can cook to create consumables with party members. You can clean, which provides a minor HP boost. You can do the laundry, which lets you sometimes find money because reasons. You can talk to allies for brief conversations that might raise a royal virtue or two, or you can have a shower, which gives you an XP boost sometimes. You can also bathe, which gives you stat increases depending on which bath salts you use. The bathing system itself is bizarrely detailed. Different bath salts provide different stat boosts, and you discover new varieties by visiting visiting different villages. It's a weirdly specific system that feels transplanted from a different game. Occasionally while traveling, you'll get random events. Bandits attack, you find a merchant, or you discover a hidden campsite. These are brief diversions rather than meaningful exploration opportunity, and they mostly feel obligatory rather than exciting. Small locations dot the map between major cities, and these typically offer a shop with maybe a unique item or two, an inn for resting in, and 1 or 2 NPCs with fetch quests. These locations are even more linear than towns, usually just a single screen with clearly marked interactive elements. You'll tend to visit these places once for the unique items and then never return unless a quest demands it. Environmental interaction is virtually non-existent. You can't jump or climb or interact with most objects or affect the environment in any meaningful way. You can talk to NPCs, open treasure chests, and examine specific glowing objects. That's it. The world is a static backdrop for combat encounters rather than a living space to explore. Much like the rest of the game's presentation and mechanics, Shoji Meguro's orchestral score is technically proficient but lacks the memorable hooks that defined his previous work. Where Persona 5 had acid jazz that burrowed into your brain, and where SMT3 had atmospheric industrial soundscapes, Metaphor has generic fantasy orchestration with really annoying vocals that get tiresome very quickly. The battle theme is energetic but forgettable. It doesn't evolve or change based on story progression. There's no equivalent to Persona's evolving battle themes or SMT's atmospheric combat tracks. It's background music in the most literal sense, competent but never commanding attention. Emotional scenes fare somewhat better with sweeping orchestral pieces that adequately support the drama, but again, they're merely adequate. You won't be humming these songs or seeking out the soundtrack after playing. Combat sound design is solid. Attacks have appropriate weight, spells sound suitably magical, and critical hits deliver satisfying audio feedback. It's professional work that never excels beyond competence. Environmental audio is sparse. Towns have generic crowd noise, dungeons have echoing footsteps, battles have clashing steel. There's no creative use of audio to enhance atmosphere or build tension. The protagonist being voiced is a welcome change from some silent Persona and Mega 10 heroes. It allows for actual character development and emotional expression during story scenes. Even if the character design is bland, at least they can speak their blandness aloud. The endgame revolves around unlocking royal archetypes, which are ultimate forms for each party member. These require bond rank 8 with the character, multiple high-level archetype masters, 30,000 plus mag investment, and story progression to specific points. The protagonist gets the Prince archetype, specializing in light and almighty damage with no weaknesses. Through the resist all passive, it eventually resists everything except almighty. It's overpowered by design and is really quite suitable for post-game challenges. The game also features multiple endings based on meeting story deadlines, key dialogue choices, and the final decision regarding Louis' offer. Bad endings aren't just game over screens, they show genuine consequences. Reject your destiny and watch Louis transform everyone into monsters. Accept his offer and rule over a world of horrors. These aren't happy alternatives, just different flavors of failure, and the true ending requires perfect execution. All deadlines met and all correct choices made, and the final boss defeated. It also unlocks the regicide difficulty for masochists who want enemies with extra turn icons. New Game Plus is surprisingly limited and allows players to carry over follower bond ranks, keep royal virtue levels, retain money and items, and access the aforementioned regicide difficulty. What you don't keep are archetypes or levels, forcing a complete restart of combat progression, and it's clearly designed for story completion rather than power fantasy. Full completion requires multiple playthroughs due to time constraints. You can't see absolutely everything in one run. The calendar system and true ending ensure this. It's artificial longevity through forced repetition rather than meaningful. Alright, let's address the obvious. This is fantasy Persona. It's not inspired Persona, it's not influenced by Persona. This is Persona with a medieval coat of paint. The systems are identical. Calendar progression, social links, time management, deadline-based story structure, social stats, and combat weakness exploitation. The archetype system tries to differentiate itself through transformation rather than summoning or invoking, but functionally it's the same. You're still collecting magical beings to use different skills in combat. The medieval setting is superficial, and the underlying structure is pure Persona. Metaphor ReFantazio takes these proven systems from both Persona and Shin Megami Tensei games and does absolutely nothing new with them. They're competently implemented and well refined, but never evolve. It's like watching a really boring cover band at a wedding. They're technically proficient, providing the classics that some of the audience want, but creatively vacant and offering nothing new to sink your teeth into. In 2024's JRPG landscape, Metaphor feels outdated despite its recent release. Clair Obscure Expedition 33, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Final Fantasy 16, and even Tales of Arise have pushed the genre forward in various ways. Metaphor pushes nothing. It perfects Atlus's existing formulas without adding anything new. Metaphor ReFantazio does several things exceptionally well. Combat is mechanically excellent with perfect difficulty balancing. The archetype system offers genuine build variety. Quality of life features like battle retry are well implemented implemented, and the hybrid real-time turn-based combat is genuinely innovative, if not very engaging. This is a professionally made game by experienced developers who understand JRPG mechanics. Every system works as intended, every feature is polished to a shine. There is clear evidence of lessons learned from decades of games development and Atlus RPGs, but technical competence isn't enough. Metaphor fails in crucial ways. It has a complete lack of creative identity, a hideous GUI that actively harms the experience, a generic art direction afraid to take risks, heavy-handed metaphors that collapse under the slightest scrutiny, a very predictable story with poor pacing, a corridor level design that feels archaic and boring, forgettable music from a once legendary composer, and safe design choices that prevent memorability or real engagement. Metaphor's core problem is that it doesn't know what it wants to be. It wants to be a new IP, but clings to established formulas. It wants to make political statements, but lacks the courage to say anything meaningful or truly mature. It wants to be fantasy, but constantly references modern-day reality. And here's the tragedy. Metaphor ReFantazio is a good game. It's mechanically sound, technically polished, and content-rich. You'll get 60 to 80 hours of solid JRPG gameplay, but you'll forget it all the moment you finish. And throughout my playthrough, all I kept thinking was that I'd rather just play Persona instead. It's not bad enough to hate or good enough to love. It exists in that terrible middle ground, competent mediocrity, which isn't good enough in today's gaming landscape. And seriously, Atlus, hire someone who understands color theory better. That teal and pink GUI is a war crime against eyeballs. We have the technology to make interfaces that don't cause physical pain, and you should know better. Feel free to leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. I always appreciate it, and it really does help me make something you could trust and value to give you as much useful analysis and information as possible when you're planning to buy and play a new video game with your hard-earned money. Hit the subscribe button, maybe even the bell button, and whichever thumb you think the video deserves. And as always, my people, take care of yourselves.